I just want to start by, giving you some context about why we're here together today. Open Ireland Network is an organisation and a community that I co-founded back in 2020, and it was all about bringing the community in Ireland together who cared about open source and enabling it at a national level and supporting it at a national level. And this event was born out of the discussions that we had and realising how important it was to have cross-sectoral discussions, because open source is all about collaboration and enabling collaboration, and we wanted to do that better here in Ireland. And I think why we are here, if you're asking yourself, why are we in this room? These were the questions that we continuously ask. How can open source help us innovate quickly, collaborate better? It is a tool that we can use to make that happen. And very specifically, in the context of Ireland, how it can impact our own innovation strategy, how we use the principles and the methods and the practices to help us in our goals to be able to make innovation happen, have it developed, but also have it have impact and have it be adopted. And there are ways in which that can happen. And I was going to start, actually. I had my whole speech prepared where I was going to give you an overview of the important things that were happening in AI, like, for example, the Open Source Economic Report that was talking about commercial open source companies and how they've got greater valuations, 7 times at IPO, 14 times mergers, acquisitions. That was a brilliant report that came out earlier this year. I was going to talk about the Cyber Resiliency Act and how there might be special exemptions from open source, and isn't that great? And I was going to point out that open source came in the news earlier. I was very surprised on January 31st to see our business newspaper talk about how Irish firms could benefit from the open source sovereignty plan in Europe and how wonderful that is. You may recognize this person in the photo. He will be appearing later. But I was also going to cover how exciting it was to be representing some open source initiatives at the United Nations Open Source Week and the discussion there about the global potential for digital public infrastructure. I was going to talk about the event that we had yesterday, which brought together 30 representatives from the global university ecosystem that all came together to talk about institutionalizing open source in academia. I was going to talk about open source AI, because you can't go far without mentioning AI, and talk about how the trends are out there that people are downloading more and more open source models, and they're not the ones you may think of. They're not the ones you may even have heard of, but there are new ones coming out every week. And they're not necessarily all like the core foundational models you think of. Sometimes there is now a trend moving towards less general purpose LLMs, but also domain-specific LLMs like this one from SAP, which they brought out just before Christmas on Hugging Face. They've had over 340,000 downloads. It's been downloaded 30,000 times a week, born out of EU innovation. Better performance for their particular use case than general purpose LLMs. 50,000 times less energy consumption. These are the kinds of trends that are happening in the open source world in the area of AI that we could spend, and we will spend, more time later discussing. But fundamentally, I was going on that track, and then I actually saw the Davos speech, and I don't know if any of you saw Mark Carney speaking at Davos, but I suppose it was the first time that I turned on the news and wasn't really kind of filled with despair, and it really prompted me to personally reflect on the work that we're doing here today and how it matters in this global context we find ourselves. Because Mark Carney spoke about a rupture in the world order. He talked about how the things that we have assumed for decades, things like stability, things like the global institutions that help us all work together, they're all under threat. And he talked about infrastructure as a strategic asset potentially being weaponized. And he also talked about how this sort of discussion can all cause us to turn inwards. So that's almost like a natural reaction that we all want to say, okay, in a world of threat, why don't we all just look inwards to ourselves? Why don't we build walls? Why don't we dig bunkers? Why don't we knuckle down? But that is a very poor path to a good future. Because we all know where that goes. You only have to look around the world today to realize where that path leads us. And it's not a good place. It's a place of insecurity. It's a place of less trust. It's a poorer place. It's a more fragile place. And fundamentally, it's not a path that I want us all to go for. And if I think about Ireland, well, Ireland, by its very nature, is a small, open economy. We have always been that. And if we think about what we want to do in Ireland, We know that there is a risk of, basically it's not even practical for us to think about going it alone. We are not a country our strength is not doing it alone. Our strength is about being part of a bigger, trusted network, being a trusted partner in a system that is bigger than ourselves and the role that we play there, because we are all about connecting, we are about contributing, we are about building alongside others, whether it be physical stuff or cultural stuff. That is what we do. That is our heritage. And it is our potential for the future too, I think. Because I think if we look at what Ireland wants to build for the future, do we really want to build fortresses and bunkers? We're really bad at that. I think we should be building roads and bridges. We're really good at that. Well, we're better at that anyway. And whether that be in the physical sense or in the cultural sense, it is a better pathway forward for us, I believe, because that's what we have had a history of doing. And of course, building roads and bridges is not soft infrastructure. It's not enough to have a bucket of Tarbicad, a couple of shovels and a few willing individuals and think, go at it. Building roads and bridges requires planning and maintenance and standards and rules of the road and investment vehicles and cross-discipline collaboration. These things are hard. And it's more than just the technical capabilities of building roads you need. You need the system to support you in doing it. We know that. God knows we know it in Ireland in terms of planning processes and whatnot. And I think when I heard Mark Carney's speech, and I heard him talk about collective investments and shared standards and complementarities, I'm thinking, these are the words that I hear all the time in the open source community. He might as well be talking about how we do collaboration in open source. And for me then, it made me think about the work that we do in the context of this. Because open source is the building blocks that form our roads and bridges, our digital roads and bridges. It is the foundation of a global digital public infrastructure that we all rely on. Technology moves our world now, and open source makes the technology work. And for me, this is so important. And as we think about it, we have to understand that it is not a soft, informal endeavor. It requires planning and maintenance and standards and investments and collaboration. And collaboration in scenarios where we have to do it globally. That means collaborating with people we don't always agree with. But it means deciding on our common purpose and making that work for the mutual benefit of all. And these are the challenges that I think face us today in the open source world. So why are we here? I talked earlier about the questions. I want to expand on the questions that I would like us to talk about here today, because it's not enough just to talk about how open source helps innovation. I think if you're here today, you have a pretty good inkling that that's the case. But how do we really make open source collaborations work at scale and with impact and quickly? How do we make sure that we have the last mile impact? Are we just talking about creating it, or are we actually talking about how it's adopted and how it's adopted in a frictionless way to actually have social and economic impact? Are we talking about how we maintain and sustain digital public infrastructure rather than just creating it and hoping someone will do the best to make it better in the future? Roads and bridges aren't built on hope. So we need to make sure that we are actually working on these hard questions. And I'll note about the Open Source Week in Brussels. I was over there last week. I went to the Open Forum Europe's Digital Policy, or the Policy Forum, and FOSDEM, which some of you may have heard of. It's one of the biggest open source conferences in the world. Thousands of people go. And if you look at the tracks, there's over 40 dev rooms. It's quite overwhelming. But it's not just technical stuff. If you look at the actual topics that are being discussed there, it's these things. They're not always just about the technical things. And by the way, there are technical things discussed, because it's not like that's easy either. But there are a whole lot of other challenges that we all have to address together. And so for me, thinking about digital roads and bridges, thinking about open source, it is anything but informal. Open source, when done right, at scale and with impact, it has governance. It has security protocols. It has investment vehicles. It has the ways and the rules and norms in which we all work together. It has ways of escalating and de-escalating when we have problems. It has a whole load of things that are important, because effective collaboration is a discipline. It's not a vibe. It's not just a good intent. It is actually knowing how to collaborate, and it is hard. And it's not just about the technical things, it's about the process we do as well. So when we think about the challenges, they are not just technical. They are about bringing that technical problem to having impact about how we do it together. The building it hard together is hard to doing it together. The taking it from being built and making it have social impact or economic impact is hard. And there are fewer people focusing on that part of the problem. So how can we contribute? So I was trying to think about this because fundamentally we are a small country in Ireland. And, you know, I've been to the conferences where they show top open source contributors in the world, and by numbers, we will never be on that list. And that's not saying that we don't do incredible contributions from here, because if you look at the per capita numbers, we're pretty high on the list, but they don't look at per capita numbers, and that's fine. We may not be on that list, but I think there are other things that we can potentially contribute. What are we good at? Well, I look at the things like the Irish Citizens' Assembly, which is a world-leading method by which you bring democratic, citizen-led insights into our legislative process. We started that at scale in Ireland, and it's been brought to many other countries as a method to do that right. I look at what we did with the referendum for marriage equality, and this is being pointed out as, again, a world-class example of community activism, of bridging communities, of battling misinformation, of bringing people together to make what we felt was the right thing happen. The first time in the world that marriage equality was voted in by a popular vote. I look at the fact that we have agencies who have been built and have become incredibly successful at supporting foreign companies who come to Ireland to build out what they need to do in a global perspective and to help them with all those system problems that are the hard things that you need to fix in order to be effective quickly. I think about Enterprise Ireland, a whole system of support we have for small businesses to actually bring innovative ideas to a global market, because they always focus on going global from the start. I think about the Kevin Bacon effect on steroids that we have here in Ireland. I mean, if I think about this room here, if something isn't working, I can guarantee that maybe 1 degree of separation, max 2 degrees of separation, we all know people who can fix the problem in Ireland. So we have a small community that's really well connected. You can get the right people in the room. I think about our cultural influence. I think about literary, I think about St. Patrick's Day, Irish pubs, I think about music, I think about crossover into film, I think about niche areas that maybe are not so popular, but if you know, you know. And I'm thinking, these are all excellent examples of cultural influence that we have had, that we do well, because you may not know all of them, but they are all examples of excellent endeavors in their field in terms of cultural influence. And if I think about that, I think, well, what can we solve? What can we help solve? Maybe we can solve the skills gap. It's a big problem. A lot of people are focusing on the technical skills. There are a lot more skills to consider that no one's focusing on. Maybe we can talk about frictionless cross-sector collaboration. We're already working on it. Why don't we work about it with the specific focus of doing it through open source? Why don't we think about last mile adoption and impact? Because not many people are focusing on that in the open source world. How do you go from a project to a product? How do you make sure that something that someone built with goodwill turns into actually something useful in the world? These are user experience problems. How do we make sure that it's trustworthy open source in the EU regulatory context? Regulations are coming fast and thick at us. How do we make sure that open source is appropriate for that and applies to that faster than proprietary software? Because it can if we focus on it. How about building a more collaborative culture in general? That is what we like doing. Why don't we help the world do that? So I'll leave with a quote from Mark Carney, which I particularly liked. And it's the whole idea about from the fracture, we can build something bigger, better, stronger, more just. I want to be part of that. I hope you want to be part of that. Actually, you are part of that because you're here today. So welcome. I hope you will continue to be part of this effort. And I suppose with that, I want to say a huge thank you to the people who made today possible, because we could not have done this work without the support of these organizations who have helped us bring here together today, because it is a hard endeavor to put on an event of this scale. And by the way, in terms of people who have worked hard, the folks at the Open Ireland Network team, lots of people this is no one's full-time job, by the way, and lots of people put in lots of hours to make today happen. So I want to thank everyone for that. And I also want to thank everyone in the broader Open Ireland network, not just those from Ireland, but everyone who continuously supports us with their expertise, because this is a unique gathering here today. We have people from private sector, we have people from multinationals, we have people from small Indigenous businesses that are trading globally. We have experts that are local, we have experts that are global, we have public sector representatives from government, from agencies, from academia. We have all the knowledge in the room to talk about these big system issues, and I hope we do that today.